Joining us right now on the BetQL Guest Hotline is our pal Mike Florio, editor of ProFootballTalk.com. Hey, Mike.
Hey, guys.
What's up?
So, Mike, we had some fun talking to our listeners about Bill Belichick. Give us what you reported, the rumor of Bill Belichick in Washington, and what you're hearing.
Yeah. And let me peel back the curtain a little bit. I've been doing this 23 years now, and you get to know people throughout the league. You get to know people with all the teams, people in the league office, agents, current players, former players. I mean, I've got a pretty broad network that I tap into, or that sometimes just in talking to people, you hear things. There's no magic to it. It's just some of the things you pick up in your usual conversations and text messages. And over the weekend, I mainly was looking to get my finger on the pulse of what was happening in advance of the trade deadline. And somebody just kind of blurted out, hey, keep an eye on this one. This is something that you should file away because there's a good chance that it could happen. And it's the procedure that is rarely used by NFL teams looking for head coaches. Under the rules, if you're looking for a coach, you can contact any other team that has a current head coach and say, we are interested in hiring your coach. If your coach would be willing to come work for us, what would the compensation be? And then you work it all out in advance with the two teams as to whatever the compensation would be. And then the new team has the green light to go talk to the coach. And if they work out a deal, the coach leaves, the compensation flows, and the old team has to go find a new coach. And at a time when it feels like the Patriots are kind of done with Bill Belichick and it feels like it's moving that way, what a great way for the Patriots to pull off a situation where they move on, they don't have any financial obligation, they get something in return, and Washington brings in a guy that can be sold to the fan base as someone who can potentially turn this thing around once and for all. Whether or not he does or doesn't is a different question, and whether or not it's something Josh Harris ultimately decides to do is a different question. But it is definitely something that people are keeping an eye on. It's a very real possibility that Josh Harris could decide to do what, a couple of people have said to me, hey, it's kind of like what they did with Vince Lombardi all those years ago. Go out and get a guy with a proven track record of winning championships and make him the head coach of the Washington franchise.
Is there any indication that Bill would want to leave New England, or do you think he just wants to end his career there? Is there anything coming from, I'm sure he's very tight-lipped about it, but are you hearing anything from his camp about what he wants to do going forward?
The general consensus is that he's not ready to stop coaching, and I think he's a guy whose identity is so caught up in what he does. I don't think he would just want to walk away. Now, I'll say this. It does take time for him to get things in place the way he wants them to be. And there was a dust-up a few years ago between supposedly, remember the Seth Wickersham article about the palace intrigue with Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick and Tom Brady and Jimmy Garoppolo? And right about that time, Gary Myers suggested that Belichick would want to go coach the Giants. I think they were looking for a coach at the time. Hell, they're looking for a coach every other year, so that probably was one of those times. And it was pointed out to me by someone who understands how it works, and specifically how it works in New England. It would take 5 years for Belichick to get in place everything that he needs somewhere else. And at this point in his career, why go somewhere else and have to start over? Well, if the place where you're coaching is ready to move on, that's a pretty good reason to go somewhere else and start over, whatever time it takes, wherever you go, as you start over. That would just be what you have to do. So, yes, I think that he wouldn't be ready to walk away. I think he'd like to catch Don Shula for the all-time wins mark. And, the question becomes, where are my opportunities? And if my opportunity isn't to continue with the Patriots, who else is out there? Where do I think I could make the biggest difference? Where would I be, the happiest to the extent that he's ever happy? And it's something that should be monitored as we get closer to the end of this season, because it looks like the Patriots may be thinking about change. It sure looks like Washington's thinking about change. And we know every year crazy things happen when we get into January.
It's interesting, and we're going to monitor, Mike, no doubt. But it's interesting if you think about, if he was going to stay in New England, Mac Jones clearly isn't the answer. Bailey Zappi's not the answer. So he would have to go out and get another quarterback, whether that was a free agent or a draft pick, and kind of start over. I mean, if it was a draft pick, you're starting over again, unless they decide Mac Jones is worth another year, which I doubt. But it would be interesting for him to come back with another quarterback. I don't think it would get much better in New England.
Well, and we're seeing that the Patriot way doesn't work anymore. It didn't work for Josh McDaniels in Las Vegas. It didn't work for Matt Patricia in Detroit. It is a very militaristic approach to football. You check your individuality at the door. You defer completely and totally whatever the coach wants. You take whatever crap the coach gives you. One of the things that was critical to the success of the Patriots for 19 years was the presence of a quarterback who could perform at a very high level and who took every ounce of verbal abuse that Bill Belichick would send his way just as a message to the rest of the guys that you're all held to the same standard. We all expect greatness. We all expect dedication. We all expect you to never say anything to anybody. We all expect your interviews with the media to be boring. And, he's kept an entire organization under his thumb for 20 years, and part of that was Brady willingly crawled under Bill Belichick's thumb as part of this broader effort to prove himself as the 199th overall pick in the draft. I just don't think it's going to work unless you have another quarterback who is great and who is inclined to submit to Bill Belichick. And, I think the main reason Brady ultimately was willing to submit is because he was trying to prove himself as a guy who was taken so low in the draft. I don't know that a top 5 pick is going to submit to Belichick the way that Brady did. So it may be that what happened for that extended period of time in New England can never be replicated by Bill Belichick under any other circumstances with any other team, unless he has another Tom Brady fall out of the sky in round 6 or 7 and become great and become willing to be the centerpiece of this Patriot Way 2.0, where Bill's the general and everyone else is a buck private, and they listen to him completely and they deal with him completely, and they're content to be happy one day of the year when they get their Super Bowl rings.
Mm-hmm. The one X factor for me is, I guess it was news to some people, certainly news to me this weekend, that Kraft, this is what I understand, that they had given him a new contract, and you said in the scenario to tell the teams that you're going to have to pay, I get it, compensation if you want him. But what if there isn't any interest? I mean, is Kraft just going to blow him out like Mark Davis and pay him $10 million a year or whatever it is, whatever he's got left on his contract? That's kind of weird. Like, I just assumed they were going to move on, but now knowing he got a new contract, I don't assume that anymore.
Well, I think that story was leaked to NFL media when it was for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I originally thought the reason was that Bill Belichick's camp wanted to take the steam out of the speculation that was existing at the time that he might get fired during the season. Once I heard what I heard over the weekend, I started thinking, you know what? Part of this message may be, hey, owners out there who are starting around late October, early November to put your wish list together of the next coach you want to hire. And, how can it not be happening for the teams that know that, number one, this season isn't it, and number two, we're going to make a change? You start coming up with your wish list. I mean, kids are already thinking about what they want for Christmas. Owners are already thinking about what they want by way of a next head coach. And to have that leak when it did, the message is to Josh Harris or anyone else, you're not just going to be able to go hire this guy. You're going to have to deal with us. You're going to have to give us something if you want this guy. It's part of the price that you're going to have to pay to get him. So that, I think at the end of the day, his contract, whether it was an extension of an existing contract or it was a brand new contract because his last one had expired, whatever it is, it's not going to be an impediment if Robert Kraft at the end of the day decides he wants to move on from Bill Belichick. And it definitely won't be an impediment if he can do it in a way where he gets something back from Josh Harris or somebody else to move on from Bill Belichick and not owe him a penny.
Hey, Mike, real quick, it doesn't come as a shock to me at all that the Commanders are looking at it, because remember, before Peyton took the gig, or at some point he did an interview where Peyton said he had talked to like Commanders' potential owners.
That's right. No, that's absolutely right. And every new owner is going to want to have his or her own management team of business operations, football operations, head coach. Look, it's very easy to get caught up in this idea because what else are you going to do? July 22nd, ownership changes. Oh, we open training camp in a week. Well, we can all pack up our stuff and leave now, or we can give it everything we have and try to do well enough that the owner decides to postpone or abandon the plan to bring in the people that the owner already envisions bringing in, whoever they may be. Josh Harris didn't buy that team because he had a burning desire to employ Ron Rivera, Martin Mayhew, and Jason Wright. Josh Harris bought that team because it was available. He tried to get the Broncos. He was outbid by the Walmart Group. And so here come the Commanders, and he ended up with a winning bid. He's going to have his own people in there unless they do well enough that it's bad business to make a change. And look at where we are. And that's why, for me, the decision to trade both Chase Young and Montez Sweat told me Josh Harris is thinking about and planning to press the reset button. And I think everybody gets blown out and he starts over. And one path is to pursue someone like Bill Belichick, who would definitely bring cachet. Whether or not he brings wins is a different issue, but he would bring cachet to the Washington Commanders.
What about Jim Harbaugh? Do you think? I think everything that's happened in Michigan, it's inevitable. He's going to be gone. We'll see what kind of penalty the Wolverines get this year, if they get any. But he's obviously going to be blamed for it. And I predict he's in the NFL next year. Now, I don't know if Josh Harris would be interested in a Jim Harbaugh type, but he's certainly a big name, cachet, like you say. Do you think Harbaugh would be attractive to the Commanders?
This is another example of story that gets handed to NFL media, and you wonder why.
Okay.
The story that was out this past weekend that if Jim Harbaugh is suspended by the NCAA, the NFL may suspend him as well, and I think the Washington Post has had something along those same lines. There's no basis for it. There's no rule for it. This is the NFL doing two things. Number one, sucking up to the NCAA, which provides it a free farm system, and number two, putting all the teams on notice. Hey, you're making your wish list now? Well, if Jim Harbaugh's at the top of your wish list and he ultimately gets suspended by the NCAA, we're going to suspend him too. So factor that into your decision on to who your next head coach is going to be. What's that going to do? It's going to scare people off.
Right.
You know, I know the word Colin Kaepernick, the name Colin Kaepernick gets people triggered for a lot of reasons. But the bottom line is they colluded against him. They may do to Harbaugh what they did to Kaepernick. Collude against him and make sure none of the teams will touch him. And frankly, depending upon how far this whole thing goes, I mean, it's an ugly mess of cheating and nefarious activity. And either Harbaugh knew about it or he was Mr. Magoo. Either way, it's a horrible look. And it would make me think twice about hiring him to be a coach of my NFL team.
So we've been talking about this as well, getting back to Rivera. Whether or not Josh Harris, obviously Josh Harris said, let's just trade a couple of our, pass rushers for future draft picks. And Ron Rivera is not going to be around for that, for the draft picks. But do you think that Harris would move him out mid-season? Let's just say they lose to the Patriots, lose to the Seahawks, and then they've lost 7 of 8 or 8 of 9. I can't remember what number it is. But would he move him out mid-season? Do you think he'd say, you know what, Ron, you did a lot for this organization, especially with the Snyder stuff, and got cancer, and he'll just wait until the end of the year?
I think there's value in the idea of at some point letting Eric Bieniemy audition for the job. And once you know it's over, why delay the inevitable? Why prolong it? It gives you a chance to begin aspects of your formal search early, and it also gives Eric Bieniemy an opportunity to maybe do enough that he may be the one who emerges as the next head coach of the team. So I think depending upon how this goes, it's in play. And the trade of Sweat and Young is something that makes me say Josh Harris is currently considering everything and starting to move in a direction of changing out, all key positions at some point between now and the end of the season.
How many teams do you think will be looking for head coaches, whether, off season or will fire their coaches this year?
There's so many factors that go into it, but we see 25% of the league in a lot of years turn over. So, 5, 6, 7, 8 maybe.
Yep.
Maybe. It just depends on how the rest of the season goes.
Raiders obviously one of them. We assume it's going to be Washington too. What about Eberflus in Chicago?
That's a possibility. The Chargers are a possibility.
Yep.
These 2 extra playoff spots are very beneficial to coaches who are on the hot seat, because for a lot of coaches, the mandate is get to the playoffs. So with 14 instead of 12, a couple of guys who otherwise might have gotten fired get reprieves. There's the guys who are already on the hot seat and the guys who may end up on the hot seat if things continue to fall apart for them or suddenly fall apart for them down the stretch.
Yep. All right, Mike, appreciate the time, buddy. Let's talk soon, okay?
All right, thanks, guys.
Yep. Have
Good
a great
talking to you.
weekend.
Yep.
See you.
Interesting stuff regarding Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
I don't see it. I don't think any of us see it, but would be interesting. And I know Cakes would hate it because Bill Belichick couldn't even drive to work under the Cakes plan.
If you want another old defensive-oriented coach, Bill Belichick's right up your alley. That's your guy.